Jessica Alstrom, spiritual teacher, medical intuitive, and quantum integration specialist, answers your spiritual questions and assists you through understanding your personal process while providing tools and techniques to move swiftly through the journey back to light.
Hello and welcome to the Transcendence Podcast. This is your host, Jessica Alstrom, and I am going to do a podcast today on two kind of segments. One is shadow work, and the other one is dark night of the soul. And those are two kind of spiritual terms that we use on our personal process that I wanted to kind of clarify and maybe help lead to some understanding of, a better understanding of what each of those things are and how somehow, some way they all end up together. So what is a dark night of the soul? I'm sure you've heard that before. And I know that if you're on your spiritual journey or your awareness journey, you have definitely survived one or two by now. And what the dark night of the soul kind of means is when you awaken and you become aware. And that's what awaken means. It means all of a sudden it's almost like you've been staring at the TV for, your whole life, and someone immediately turns it off and you kind of come to and like start looking around for the first time. It's like, whoa, where am I? It's kind of the sensation of being awake. And some people get smacked awake. Some people are born awake and they just shut it down for a really long time. And other people actually have like some sort of awakening process in their life. And once you do this, it's a pretty high time in your life, because all of a sudden, for the first time in your entire life, you don't feel like a black sheep. You feel like you're finally reading information that resonates. You're finally listening to things that speak your language. You're understanding the world better. You're understanding yourself better. And it's usually a pretty amazing time when you first go through that process. And I know it was for me. And you start to learn all about law of attraction, and you start to learn, about oneness and universal energy and divine feminine and masculine, and you really start to understand all of these components of this earth game and the journey that we're on from de-ascension to re-ascension. And in 2012 it was kind of like someone hit a light switch, and that's when the grand viral awakening began to occur. And just like with any kind of rebirth, it's usually at some point it can be kind of a painful experience. Well, I kind of believe that in order to have a complete awakening, it's not done all at once. It really, really happens in stages, and because you don't become aware all at once. It's not like someone just completely turns on the light and you see everything. And now some people experience that, and they usually have a real difficult time, if say, they just go through a spontaneous awakening and everything just, becomes ultra clear. I think that there are people out there that have experienced, but for, 98, 99% of us, it happens in stages, and it happens through basically path of least resistance, how we can handle it. It's like when we can handle more information, it's presented to us. When we can handle more awareness, it's presented to us. And so it's almost like it happens in baby steps. You're born, and then you look around and you start to notice yourself, and you start to discover yourself, and you start to discover life, and you start crawling, and you start walking, and then you start running. And in that process, those first couple of years are really, really kind of like the newborn toddler stage. And in the beginning, it's all exciting, and it's all new, and it's all, it's like you can't get enough, and you're hungry for the information, and you're hungry to learn, and you're hungry to practice, and you're hungry to use the tools. And that's why I've created so many different podcasts for you guys out there for the different stages of your different stages of your awakening, because once you start to learn the law of attraction, you get really excited, and you want to be this powerful manifester. And so you read all this personal development and this self-help and manifesting tools and affirmation tips, and you really have a logical understanding of how it works. And then you go in to put it into action. And as soon as you put it into action, you have invited the term shadow work into your life. Because what happens is when you start to move forward on your journey, you have to uncover anything that's standing in your way of that, which means that you have to start pulling up anchors that have been lodged in place for a really long time. And these anchors are fear and grief and humiliation and shame and guilt and basically resentment. And we don't realize that those are the only things that have ever really kept us asleep in the first place. So when we start to become aware of shadow aspects of ourselves, and I've described it in lots of other podcasts as the subconscious and unconscious minds that are running programs at an energetic level, responding to law of attraction, what happens is you really, really try with your quantum focus to use that 10% of your conscious reality to focus on bringing forth manifestations. And you do your new moon ceremonies, and you do your rituals, and you do your affirmations, and you do your tapping, and this is all fantastic, and that is starting to move you into the direction. And as soon as you start to move into the direction of your joy, you start to pull up all the shadow stuff. And the shadow stuff is the stuff that you just haven't been aware of. And, maybe it's triggered hundreds of times, but you've never been focused on you in the trigger. You've always been focused on who triggered you. So when you start to do spiritual work, you realize that everything basically comes full circle back to you as the divine creator. And that's where you get hit with this big wall of responsibility. And that's usually where you have your biggest dark nights of the soul. And the dark nights of the soul happen and it's kind of like a destruction process. And what I call it is, I love dark nights of the soul. I mean, I obviously don't like it when I'm in it, but once I'm through them, there's always huge growth and opportunity waiting. Huge amounts of awareness that are left from the storm, basically. It's like the rainbow after the storm. And what a dark night of the soul is basically it's like an aspect of you, an aspect of your personality construct kind of dies. And maybe you've just become way too aware to kind of buy into some of the beliefs that you have, and you've really been practicing new patterns and new routines, and all of a sudden you don't know who you are anymore. And that's usually what a dark night of the soul feels like. It feels like your life is being crumbled around you, and nothing feels the same, nothing looks the same. You may not have any motivation, you might not have any desire at all. Everything that you thought you loved up until this point now means nothing. And I might be over exaggerating your dark night of the soul, but I've had probably 3 on my journey over the last 10 years that, have really kind of hit me at the knees and put me into a place where the only thing that I could honestly do was completely surrender to it. And, when we actively do shadow work, which is diving down deep into the darkness of our subconscious and unconscious to make all of those things conscious that are holding us back and blocking us from moving forward, that is basically what shadow work is. And that is what we use to basically start pulling up the anchors so we don't have to necessarily get blindsided by the dark nights of the soul. And dark night of the soul is just another rebirth. So as you have your awakening, it's usually, it's usually from pressure. Pressure of I just can't do this anymore, or something happens, or you manifest an illness, or you finally get out of a relationship, or someone passes and it smacks you awake. And when you start to go on your journey and you learn and it's exciting, and then you hit your first wall and you realize that you are in the complete unknown. And that is where the ego, or the construct of your personality that has been filtered through lower density, is experiencing a dark night, because the ego doesn't know how to make your life work for you anymore. It's like nothing makes sense. Everything that used to be on automatic, like blame, shame, guilt, resentment, it doesn't, oh, fire truck. It doesn't it doesn't compute anymore, which means you can't behave the way you could before. And so it's like ego goes searching for itself, and all of a sudden it realizes its identity is missing, and it realizes that everything has always been about you, and that, you know, you were the divine creator of this, but you don't know how all of that works. And the only thing you can really do in that is just completely surrender to it. And that's why I, you know, have pretty much dedicated my entire teachings to shadow work, because I think there's enough books out there, and there's enough amazing teachers out there that teach the laws of attraction principles. It's not that you don't understand how to manifest. It's about what's in your way of manifesting. And that's why I've changed. You know, a lot of people say, you know, manifesting is about visualizing and desiring and imagining and believing, and that's it. And that's usually the recipe for your everyday law of attraction book. And that's why if you followed my, you know, manifestation principles, you notice how many more steps I have, and how there's space in there to clear karma, and there's space in there to surrender and move into humility and allow the universe to start controlling your life instead of your ego controlling your life. And the ego, your personality construct, your third dimensional filter system does not want anyone else in control except itself. Control is the way that ego feels safe. And you will find that the person who have the larger egos, or the egos that have been driving the, you know, the pilot in the pilot seat for most of their lives, they are adamant about controlling everything. And, you know, higher self is never about controlling. It's about allowing, and it's about going with the flow, and it's about having no expectations. And ego's all about expectations, and you know, ego is always disappointed, 100%, because ego has this vision of how it has to be. And when it doesn't work out that way, you know, because maybe your higher self has greater plans for you, or it needs you to learn something before you can actually experience the manifested desire that you've been wanting, you know, ego freaks out, and it just completely dives down into deep, deep depression. And so when you kind of even move through that step, your dark nights of the soul feel more like absolute confusion. They feel like absolute unknown, where, from what I can remember, it's like I didn't know who I was anymore. And that really, really kind of like put me into a pretty intense panic attack, because, you know, it's like I may not have liked my ego, but I knew my ego, and my ego knew me, and I knew how to get out of situations, and I knew how to be in situations, and I knew how to, you know, make my life work as that person that I had, you know, developed my character to be all that time. And all of a sudden, those components were no longer there, and that game was no longer available for me, and I couldn't think in the same ways. It was almost like I didn't have access to those ego triggers anymore during that dark night of the soul. And dark night of the soul is also, it's like a storm. There's usually a huge release that happens. There's fear that comes to the surface. There's humiliation, there's shame, there's guilt, and it's almost like a huge storm that needs to just clear everything out of the way. And whether they last a week, you know, or 3 weeks, I hope it wouldn't be 3 weeks for you, it's all part of the process. And so it's like, if you kind of know, you know, that you're heading in the direction of joy, and that on your GPS you're going to hit some storms, and you just make space for those, and you do your shadow work. And the shadow work that we do here at Transcendence is, we do a couple of different ways. We do a ton of trauma release, because trauma is always in your way of your manifestations. Trauma stops the flow of energy, and it keeps you frozen in time on your timeline at the exact moment where the trauma happened. And so there's versions of you that need to be back integrated into your timeline to make you one holistic being. And you really won't move on from yourself, and you do carry your past with you, so your manifestations usually end up bittersweet if you've got a lot of trauma or drama in your timeline. And so doing shadow work, not because you have to, but because you cannot stand being where you are anymore, is honestly a smart choice. No one's going to make it without doing shadow work, you know, and And I'm sure that different teachers have different approaches. And I know that there's some amazing fifth dimensional teachers out there that are teaching, counting seconds and breath and staying positive and focused in the moment. And I will tell you that works. But you have to have the most intense focus. You need to be around the most supportive group in the world. You need to have 0 to no obligations in your own personal life to be able to focus 100% of the time on your personal frequency and vibration. But if you're like me, and part of your consciousness is dedicated to being a mother, which means that I am a caretaker, and part of your consciousness means, being around and working with employees and clients and practitioners all day long, then I'm just moving throughout my day, and I'm allowing whatever shows up to be my teacher. And so I've noticed that the teachers that are teaching these really high level consciousness principles, they are not on the average spiritual journey. And I would say that I'm kind of that teacher for the average journey. I am that teacher that's going to keep it real and, and say I know how it feels to try to want wealth, but you don't have the vibration of wealth. And so I understand, because I had those questions. I used to listen to, 10 or 11 years ago, I used to listen to Abraham Hicks, and, they would just channel all about, feeling the feelings of wealth. And I'm like, yeah, I've never had that experience, so I don't know what that feels like. How do you generate a feeling of wealth when you've never had it? And so I've been through all the frustrating points of, how the spiritual journey works. But if you just follow the path of excitement, it will take you into the shadows. Because if you notice, every movie and every fairy tale, there's always a dark forest, or there's always, a down plot, or, there's always a downside to make everything kind of mean more and feel more. And, in the romantic comedy, there's a guy that's a great heart, and he has, he's looking for the dream girl, and, he loses his job, and he loses his wallet, and he loses his identity, and, he keeps missing her on the train. And you know what? It's how is every single movie different than your life? I mean, you are literally playing a character, and the shadows are nothing other than the down plots of movies. They are the dark forest in the fairy tales. And as they walk through the dark forest, they realize so much about themselves, and they get strong, and they get wisdom, and they attain knowledge, and, they get self-love because they've got so much confidence for making it through. And you know what? I'm going to tell you that this thing we call Earth is nothing more than a movie. It's a video game, it's a movie, it's virtual reality. We are making it up as we go along, but we also have to realize that if we're not consciously aware, then we have to follow the script that is kind of been playing for us. And that's why if you kind of become very aware and you start doing a lot of shadow work on purpose, yes, you're going to have your dark nights of the soul. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and tell you that this isn't part of your journey. It's going to move faster. I mean, 10 years ago, I think that shadow work was a lot more intense because we didn't have access to the consciousness that's on the planet right now. These things don't take as long, especially what I've noticed with my life coaching group and just my clients that have been coming in over the last, 6 months. It's like they get it. And it's such a great feeling for me because it's not like I feel like I'm speaking a different language to people anymore. And when they come in, they really get it. And they're going home and they're really doing their homework, and they're really integrating the principles into their life, and they're actively doing the shadow work, and they're finding support in the dark nights of the soul. And, to me, dark night of soul is kind of like childbirth. It's like, something amazing is going to happen afterwards, but it's going to be hell, and I know I kind of speak for a lot of women out there, but for men it's the same thing. It's like, if you're in the gym, you have to break down the muscle in order for it to grow. There's no other, that's physics. So break down, break through. If you're resisting your breakdowns, you're going to keep that illness in your body. You're going to keep love away from you. You're going to keep money away from you, because your soul is saying, yes, you can have anything you desire. We can create beautiful heaven on earth. And I will tell you that 2016, you're supposed to have it all. It's the year of full circle. It's the year of manifestation, and it's the year of completion in numerology. So therefore, all that Spirit is asking you to do right now, and all that your higher self is asking you to do right now, is walk through the fire and know that you're not going to get burned. You're just going to get, you're going to become unbreakable. You're going to become fireproof. You're going to become invincible and unlimited, and you're going to be able to handle wealth. You're going to be able to handle love, because, you know, Marianne Williamson had this great quote, and it's really long, so I wouldn't be able to quote it verbatim, but she talks about how we're more afraid of our greatness than we are our darkness. And I think that's so true, because I had this awesome new client show up yesterday, and she's probably going to listen to this podcast, so you know who you are. And she was a lot like me. Like, I saw a lot of myself in her, and she was very driven, and she had a really positive attitude about not giving up on herself, and she's in a relationship right now with an amazing guy, but he's kind of lost in his dark night. And, he's suffering from some PTSD from some military activity, and he's just kind of down on himself. And so she's being the breadwinner. And, and she came into the session with me, and we were talking, and I asked her what she needed and wanted. She said, she wanted some help with her journey, but she also wanted some help, finding some ways to help her boyfriend. And she really wanted him to get a great job so that he could have higher confidence. And I kind of looked at her, and I was reading in her energy, and I was like, do you really want him to have a great job? And she was like, yes, I really want that. I said, but doesn't it give you confidence to pay for everything? And she just kind of looked at me like, what? And I said, well, you got some self-confidence issues. And so if he was making buku bucks, how would you feel about yourself right now? And she just kind of teared up a little bit, and she was like, you're right. I would not feel really good about myself right now if he was, pulling his weight. And I am, I do have confidence in the relationship because of that. And so I kind of showed her some of her wounding in with her and her parents. And then I kind of was letting her know that, that this was a karmic relationship that she was in. And this relationship was going to teach her amazing things, but she needed to be aware of what she actually really desired. Because sometimes if we get what we desire, it will throw you into a tailspin. And if you listen to my podcast about karmic relationships, then I talk about when I was creating my soulmate, and I would read over, the list of what I wanted. It made me insecure because I didn't feel good enough. And so the reasons why we keep money from ourselves is because we don't feel good enough. The reason we keep love away from ourselves is because we don't feel good enough. And if you listen to my podcast about building a new reality in a reality, and what I'm about to teach on Second Sundays, this Sunday on Mother's Day, is everything stems from the initial broken heart. And it's almost like when you have a dark night of the soul, you're exposing that broken heart. And the scary, scary word of the day is vulnerability. And you would have no idea of what people do to keep vulnerability away from them. In order to be vulnerable, you have to be opened. You have to be in surrender. You can't be controlling. You have to be welcoming love. And it's funny, I had another gal last week where I said the word vulnerable, and she just completely got triggered in the office. And it's funny because she came in, she hired me to be her life coach because she wanted to find love. And yet the word vulnerability scared her. So when we start doing shadow work, we realize that the things that we want more than anything, we ourselves are keeping away. We're keeping them away. We are keeping them away. And we're keeping them away because we can't bear to be hurt again. And we can't bear to lose things. It's like, I don't want to have money because I don't want to lose it. I don't want to have money because I don't want to have fake friends. I don't want to lose it because I don't want to be judged. There's so many stories that go on in the shadows, and you think consciously one thing, and unconsciously you've got a whole different idea of why you're blocking your energy. And until you really begin to do shadow work with yourself and expose the subconscious and the unconscious with a loving, accepting heart, you're going to stay blocked and trapped and numb and depressed and sick. And I know I'm always talking about this, but to be honest, I worked on manifesting my heart's desires for 2.5 years. And it led me through the darkest, deepest hells of my life. So I thought, you know what? Instead of sugarcoating this process, why don't I just tell people the truth? I want to tell people the real truth of how all this works. And, I always talk about when you're in the dark night, you always have a flashlight. And whether it's music or a friend or maybe a podcast or, something that just makes you feel better when you feel absolutely out of control, that's all you need to make it through. And if you've listened to my podcast, Take Your Power Back, you know that you're always there with your dark night. You're never going to abandon yourself like your family has abandoned you. You're never going to abandon yourself the way that your, loves have left you. And if you have abandonment in your subconscious, then you will have intense fear of that, which actually will keep relationships away from you. And so the only thing that you need to do during your dark night is just say to yourself, I won't give up on you. I'm right here with you. This is just a storm. Everything is going to be beautiful and clean afterwards. This is a rebirth. I truly believe that the 7 chakra systems have their own unique awakening. You wake up, and usually what happens is your top chakras wake up first. Your cranial sacral, or your cranial, your third eye, and your throat. And your heart starts to open. And what happens is that's usually like the aha moments where you start like finding the going down the rabbit holes and finding out all this information, and however you got there, a sick child or a deceased family member, whatever smacked you awake has led you down that rabbit hole. And usually it's the spiritual connection that awakens first, and then you've got to integrate the lower chakras, and they have to have their own unique awakening. And I don't think that they could awaken without the spiritual guidance. Because if your root, had its own awakening before your third eye or your your sacral, then, you might not be able to handle that. Because what happens is when the root awakens, it exposes itself. And that's why we're all spinning out of control with our childhoods right now. And, past loves and, karmic relationships and, old cycles coming back around, and all these patterns resurfacing, because basically as the root and the sacral and the solar plexus begin to integrate back into the heart center, all of that has to be exposed in order to heal. And what I've noticed is the last thing that Spirit is waiting on right now to really move us into heaven on earth is to take the wall down between you and your heart. That means vulnerability. And vulnerability can be very, very scary if you don't have tools, techniques, and guidance. And luckily, by the time I had my first dark night of the soul, I was really dedicated to this process. And I remember being in a cold shower one day and just saying to myself, I am never, ever going to give up on you. No matter what it takes, I'm never going to give up. And it was probably the most truest statement that I ever made. And anybody who's on this journey knows you can never go back. You can never go back to being asleep. It's impossible. Small talk feels like sandpaper on your brain. It's like you can't do it. You need to be fed internally with knowledge and love and appreciation and information. Nothing else is ever going to be enough for you again. And once you get to that point, what I would do is I would put together a map for you and say, this is kind of how it is, and I'm not going to BS you. There's going to be tar pits, there's going to be dark nights, there's going to be, lion's dens, and this is how you can navigate through it, and this is your survival map, and this is your techniques, and this is your trigger work, and this is your time travel, and this is your guidance. And that's why I'm doing all of these podcasts right now, because it's important that we, as a planet, we have each other. And I've, never really had a teacher out there that I felt like I really, really connected to. I mean, there's some amazing teachers out there that I've definitely been inspired by, but as far as like having guidance, it's always been me. And so it's like, I know that if you didn't grasp onto yourself as your flashlight like I did, then you still need guidance. And that's why we're training tons and tons of light coaches out there, and not to sugarcoat the process for you or teach you how to cope with the past and cover up and just say, you know what, just get over it and do some forgiveness work and let's write a letter. It's like, it's a little bit more intricate than that. We've got to blow through some real crap. We've got to get through the shame and the guilt and the real raw place where the heart is being held captive. And as we expose that, dark nights happen and things get triggered and things get taken away in order to be, something better to come your way. And when you can learn and just accept and go with the flow, I will tell you that it doesn't last very long. I resisted it for a while, I was very resistant of the process in the beginning, because it was like, I think that we're so afraid of our own insecurities and our own humiliations and our own shame and guilt that we would rather stay stuck and victimized than really, really face those things in the mirror. And, you have your higher self, you have your breath, you have your body, you have, meditation, you have so many things out there that you can grasp onto as a security blanket or a permission slip while you're moving through the journey. And I will tell you that you're going to need people less and you're going to need more support, if that makes sense. Meaning what you're going to find is the people who you've really grasped onto in the past are really not going to fulfill you anymore. And you're going to need something a little bit more, someone more in tune with where you're going. Relationships will not feel the same. You will outgrow people. You will outgrow your life. And I think that you need to give yourself permission. One of the biggest reasons why people don't grow spiritually is they're really afraid to leave people and places behind. They're really afraid of leaving the comfort zone because it's a control factor. They'd rather stay in the abusive relationship than go into the unknown where they possibly could be judged and would have to be vulnerable. Because vulnerability is like the scariest thing in the entire world, yet every time you get beat down, humiliated, or unappreciated by your loved ones, isn't that what's happening anyways? So the very thing that you're trying to protect is happening to you anyways. So it's about knowing the process. And, we do right now at Transcendence, we do a ton of time travel. I do a lot of integrated life coaching, quantum life coaching, and we use the MindFit device. And the MindFit device has changed names to BrainTap, and I don't know the politics on that. I don't really care. All I know is that when I see someone before and after on a BrainTap system, I can see real visceral changes in their whole biochemistry. And so I know firsthand that it works, because I would never ever endorse anything that was a product, anything outside of you that didn't serve a huge purpose. And, I've been fortunate enough to create with the inventor of the BrainTap device a series of programs for grief and fertility in the military and self-love, and we're working on a whole bunch of other systems that are basically designed to do brain-based shadow work, and also brain reentrainment. Teach your brain how to be wealthy, because if your brain thinks you're wealthy, guess what law of attraction is going to think? If your brain thinks you're a good salesperson, guess what? You're going to make top sales. If your brain thinks you're a skinny person, metabolism and pancreas and adrenal glands and thyroid and all those beautiful things are going to show up a little bit different, and all of a sudden you're going to have a brain that thinks it's thin. Therefore, you start to eat like a thin person. And that is the biggest reason why I am an advocate for this system. And for also the shadow work that you do on your own, because your entire life should be your personal process. Every single thing should be your school, because Earth is your school, and the people in your life, the relationships in your life are your curriculum. And the war outside that you're afraid of is the war inside of yourself and you and your own bully, and it's about recognizing that everything is an inward process and that we don't fix life with money or house or boys or girls or kids. We fix it by fixing how the brain sees the world, because the brain is the receiver, and the receiver translates data through hormones to the cellular system and reacts. So you are a byproduct of everything you believe. And so if we can get the brain to believe a new story, by doing shadow work and doing meditation and doing brain tap and doing brain reentrainment and doing breath work and doing trigger work and doing life coaching, then that's exactly what transcendence is. It's a center to heal all the past trauma. And so I just wanted to leave you with this today and kind of give you kind of a behind the scenes of, why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm doing it because I don't like to watch people suffer on the spiritual journey. It's painful for me to watch. And I know it's almost like I want to be there, and I want to say, you know what, it's not going to be easy, it's going to be messy, but it's going to be the best thing you've ever done for yourself. Just imagine where you were this time last year and look at how far you've come. Because you do have that positive side of yourself that can say, look at how far we've come, look at how much we have learned, look where we are, look how much more we're trusting ourselves, And if you can stick with that and be right there with your higher self, because what's happened is basically higher self used to be really high on the frequency scale and lower self used to be really, really low on the frequency scale. And because the energy is moving so fast, density and light are moving together, and higher self and lower self are a lot closer together, which means that you and ego can have a direct two-way communication now, where you can be co-pilot and pilot, and it's not some like unattainable thing to find higher self anymore. You are right there. As soon as you go into the positive aspects, as soon as you go into the solution, as soon as you go into gratitude, as soon as you go into I need to take my power back, then all of a sudden you are there with higher self. And as soon as you drop back into shame, blame, guilt, resentment, humiliation, then you realize that, sorry, that was my phone. You realize that you have had the power the whole time. So I will leave you with that, because that was my husband calling. And I hope this little podcast helps you on your journey, and just let you know that the storm will be over soon, and you will be the person you've always wanted to be, and you will have the life you've always dreamed of having.
Thank you for joining Jessica on this transcending episode. Email us directly at jessicaalstrom@gmail.com with your questions and personal challenges you would like addressed on the show. And join us on next week's podcast. You are not alone, and remember, your higher self speaks to you through people, places, circumstances, and events.